Okay, so picture this, right? You're suddenly in charge of stopping fraud at your company.
Oh, wow.
Feels pretty overwhelming, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But what if you have like a playbook? Some kind of guide to help you navigate this crazy world of fraud prevention.
Right.
Well, good news you do. Today, we're diving into the Anti Fraud Playbook. The best defense is a good offense. It was developed by Grant Thornton and the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners.
The ACFE?
Yep, the ACFE.
Founded by Dr. Joseph T. Wells.
Right.
They're a global leader when it comes to anti-fraud training.
Yeah, sure.
They've got over 85,000 members worldwide.
Wow.
And Grant Thornton, they bring a ton of experience in fraud risk management. They actually develop some of the most widely used frameworks out there. So you're in good hands with this playbook.
Absolutely. And we need all the help we can get because the stakes are pretty high, right? The ACFE estimates that organizations lose, get this, 5% of their revenue to fraud every single year. 5%. That's huge. That's why we're really digging into this playbook today.
Yeah.
To give you the knowledge you need to fight back.
And this playbook, it's structured around 5 key principles.
Okay.
From the ACFE and COSO.
COSO.
Yeah. The Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission.
Okay.
It's like a systematic approach.
Yeah. Okay.
Guides you step by step to build a really solid anti-fraud program.
Right. So where do we start?
Play 1.
Play 1.
Focuses on self-awareness.
Okay.
Grant Thornton's Enterprise Anti-Fraud Maturity Assessment Model, that's the tool they recommend using.
Gotcha.
It helps figure out your organization's current anti-fraud maturity level. Kind of like taking stock of your defenses before you reinforce them.
So before we even start building anything, we need to know where we stand.
Exactly. It's about knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses. But play 2, that goes a step further.
Okay.
It's all about creating a culture of, anti-fraud. It's not just about, rules. It's about embedding things like responsibility, accountability, and authority at every single level. In fact, the playbook, it introduces this idea of the integrity triangle.
The integrity triangle.
Yeah.
Okay, now curious, how does this integrity triangle actually work in practice?
So imagine an environment where doing the right thing, it's just part of the company's DNA.
I like that.
Yeah. Think, clear communication from the top, training on how to make ethical decisions, systems that actually encourage and reward, doing the right thing.
So it's like a proactive approach, like building a culture that's resistant to fraud from the inside.
Exactly. And it goes hand in hand with play 3.
All right. What's play 3 all about?
It's where things get interesting. It encourages you to, think like a fraudster.
Woo!
You got to put yourself in their shoes, understand what drives them, what they're looking for, and then you can figure out how to protect those vulnerabilities that they might try to exploit.
Okay, so that's where the fraud risk map comes in?
You got it. The playbook helps you develop this visual map. It lays out all the potential fraud schemes, who might be involved, where their entry points might be. It's basically a blueprint,
Right.
Shows you where you're vulnerable and helps you understand where the risks are.
That's really smart. And I guess it's not just about financial fraud, right?
No, not at all.
The playbook also talks about damage to reputation being just as bad.
Absolutely. Reputation is everything. And that's why Play 4 takes this super comprehensive approach to risk assessment.
I see.
You analyze, how likely are certain schemes? What's the potential impact? What controls do you already have in place?
Right.
It's about getting down to the details, really understanding what's unique about your organization and prioritizing accordingly.
So you're not just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. You're being strategic.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really powerful tool in the anti-fraud world, data analytics.
Oh, yeah. Data analytics. Everyone's talking about that these days.
Play 5 really gets into how to use data to uncover fraud.
Okay.
It starts with, basic things you can do with spreadsheets, but then it gets into some pretty advanced stuff like machine learning.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. How can we actually use data analytics to find fraud?
Well, think about it like this. You can analyze purchasing data for unusual patterns.
Okay.
Like duplicate invoices or vendors that have really similar names.
Hmm.
Or you can look at employee expense reports.
Right.
See if there are any anomalies like excessive travel claims or people constantly rounding up their expenses.
Interesting.
Those are just a couple of examples, though. With more advanced tools, you can really dig deep.
So you're basically using data to spot those red flags that might go unnoticed otherwise.
Exactly. It's like having an extra set of eyes. And the ACFE, they actually offer this interactive tool for data analytics tests, which can be a great resource for putting this knowledge into action. But of course, technology alone isn't enough.
Right, it's only part of the picture. So what else does the playbook recommend?
Play 6 emphasizes targeted anti-fraud training.
Okay, targeted training, I like that.
Yeah. A one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't cut it here.
Makes sense.
The training needs to be tailored to the specific roles and responsibilities of each person,
Right.
Gives them the knowledge and tools they need to recognize and respond to fraud in their own area.
So it's like giving each person a specialized toolkit for their specific position.
That's a great way to put it. And that customized training, it's crucial. Because when something is directly relevant to someone's day-to-day work, they're more likely to really pay attention and remember what they've learned.
It makes it stick.
Exactly.
Now, let's be real for a second. Sometimes, even with the best plans and everything, things still go wrong.
Yeah.
What happens when, someone reports a fraud allegation? What then?
That's where Play 7 kicks in.
Okay.
It's all about laying the groundwork for effective investigations. This means having clear protocols in place, setting up ways to communicate, and figuring out mechanisms to see how well those investigations are done.
So it's about being ready to respond quickly and decisively if something does happen.
Precisely. You don't want to be caught off guard.
So what specific steps does the playbook recommend?
Well, it really emphasizes having a strong whistleblower protection program.
Okay, so people feel safe coming forward.
Yeah, exactly. Encourage employees to speak up if they see something fishy,
Right.
without fear of retaliation. And they also talk about these case management systems.
Case management systems.
Yeah, they help streamline the whole investigation process, make sure that every single allegation is tracked and addressed properly.
That makes a lot of sense. So you've got these systems in place to receive the reports, and then Play 8 is about actually doing the investigation itself, right?
Exactly. Play 8 dives into all the nitty-gritty of investigations.
Okay.
Evidence gathering, computer forensics, witness interviews. It's kind of like a corporate crime drama.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, piecing together all the clues to find out the truth.
It sounds pretty intense. What are some things to keep in mind to make sure these investigations are done right?
The playbook really stresses maintaining objectivity throughout the whole process. Making sure it's a thorough and unbiased investigation.
Right.
It also talks about the need for proper documentation.
Okay.
And maintaining a clear chain of custody for any evidence you collect.
Got it.
And then, of course, you have to conduct interviews in a way that gets information without putting pressure on witnesses or, making them feel intimidated.
So it's like walking this fine line between being thorough but also being sensitive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not always easy, but even after you've wrapped up an investigation, the work doesn't stop there.
Right, because stopping fraud isn't just a one-time thing.
Nope, it's an ongoing process.
So what comes next in the playbook?
Play 9 is all about continuous improvement.
Okay, continuous improvement.
Yeah. Monitoring isn't just about checking a box and moving on. It's about constantly checking how effective your fraud risk management program is.
So you're always tweaking it, making sure it's working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, exactly. Play 9 guides you through setting up these, ongoing evaluations to find weaknesses, make adjustments, and just constantly evolve your defenses.
So you're staying ahead of the game.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because fraudsters are always trying to find new ways to get around things.
That's a good point. So it's a dynamic process, not a static one.
Exactly. And finally, we get to Play 10, which is all about reporting and communication.
So getting the word out about what's happening.
Yeah. It's about sharing your successes, pointing out areas that need improvement, and keeping fraud risk management top of mind for, leadership and stakeholders.
Right. Everyone needs to be on board.
Exactly. This helps maintain momentum and make sure everyone keeps supporting your efforts.
Because if you can show people the value of what you're doing, they're more likely to give you the resources you need to keep improving.
Exactly. It's all about proving that it's worth it. And it reinforces the message that preventing fraud is everyone's responsibility, not just the compliance teams. It creates this culture of shared accountability.
I like that. Everyone's working together. This playbook has been really insightful so far. We've gone from self-assessment to investigations and beyond. What stands out to you as a key takeaway from these first 5 phases?
I think what really strikes me is how much the playbook emphasizes a proactive and holistic approach.
Mhm.
It's not just about setting up controls, it's about building that culture of integrity, using data as a tool to fight back, and constantly looking for ways to improve.
It's multifaceted.
It is. It's multifaceted. It recognizes how complex fraud is and that we need a strong and flexible response.
I totally agree. The playbook isn't giving you this quick fix. It's a guide to building a program that will last.
That's it, exactly. And it empowers organizations to take charge of their own fraud risk management, tailoring the framework to their specific needs and challenges.
It's adaptable.
It is. It's not one size fits all. It's a starting point for building a program that truly fits your organization.
And that's a great point.
Yeah.
I think it's the perfect way to transition to our next topic, how adaptable this playbook is and how it can be applied to those threats coming from outside the organization as well.
You mentioned threats from outside, and it's true, the playbook really focuses on internal controls. But the principles, the ideas in it can definitely be applied to external threats too.
That's good to hear because, as we're building up these defenses from the inside, we can't forget about those folks trying to get in from the outside.
Exactly. And the thing is, the threats from the outside are always changing.
Yeah.
They're getting more complex, harder to spot.
What are some of the biggest external threats that you think organizations are dealing with these days?
Cybercrime, that's a huge one.
Yeah, for sure.
Phishing scams, malware, attacks, ransomware. These are all ways that fraudsters use to get into systems, to steal data or disrupt operations.
It seems like we hear about data breaches all the time in the news.
Yeah.
Are those mainly from external attacks?
A lot of times, yeah. Hackers are always looking for weaknesses, exploiting vulnerabilities in software or, even just human behavior to try and get that valuable information.
It's kind of scary how they always seem to be one step ahead. What can organizations actually do to protect themselves against these attacks that are getting more and more sophisticated?
A layered approach to cybersecurity is really important.
Okay, what does that mean?
Think firewalls, intrusion detection systems.
Okay.
Regular security updates, strong password policies.
Right.
These are the basic things you need for a secure digital environment.
So it's like building a moat and, reinforcing the walls around your data.
Yeah, a good analogy.
But as we talked about before, technology by itself isn't enough.
That's right. You need to train your employees.
Yeah.
People need to be aware of the tactics that these cyber criminals use, how to spot those suspicious emails, websites, messages, that kind of thing.
We've all seen those phishing emails.
Oh, yeah.
They look so real.
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell what's legitimate and what's not.
It is. And a lot of times it's a simple mistake that opens the door for an attack. That's why security awareness training is so important.
Yeah.
It's all about giving your employees the tools to be that first line of defense.
Okay, so we've talked about cybersecurity, but what other external threats should organizations be thinking about?
Vendor due diligence, that's another big one.
What is that?
If you're working with third-party vendors, you need to make sure they've got strong security practices too.
Okay.
A weak link in your supply chain can put your whole organization at risk.
Makes sense. It's like that saying, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Exactly. And the playbook does talk about this.
Oh, good.
It emphasizes vendor risk assessments and ongoing monitoring.
So even though the playbook focuses mostly on internal stuff, it acknowledges that internal and external risks are connected.
They are, absolutely. And this brings us back to why a comprehensive approach to fraud risk management is so important. Whether the threat's coming from inside or outside the organization, the basic principles of prevention, detection, and response, they're all the same.
This conversation has really highlighted that fraud prevention isn't a one-time thing.
Right.
It's a process that's always evolving.
It is.
Always improving.
You're absolutely right. It's about creating a culture of awareness, being vigilant, and proactively managing those risks.
And constantly evaluating.
Right. Always checking.
Making changes.
It's about staying ahead of the game.
We've been talking a lot about building strong defenses, but what happens when things do go wrong?
Well,
when despite our best efforts, there's a fraud incident, how important is it to have a plan in place?
Having an incident response plan is absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
If you have a cyber attack or fraud incident,
right,
you have to be able to respond quickly and effectively to minimize the damage.
So you need to be prepared.
Absolutely.
What are the key things that should be in that plan?
First things first, you need a clear process for reporting and escalating incidents.
You
need to know who's responsible for what, Who needs to be notified? What steps need to be taken to contain the situation?
So everyone knows what to do.
Exactly. And you also need a plan for communicating with everyone involved.
Okay.
Both inside and outside the organization.
Makes sense.
Transparency and clear communication are key to maintaining trust.
Uh-huh.
And minimizing damage to your reputation.
So you don't want people spreading rumors or filling in the gaps with speculation.
Exactly. You want to control the narrative.
And then after everything is calmed down,
right?
You need to take a look at what happened.
Absolutely.
Figure out what went wrong.
You need a process for reviewing and learning from incidents.
So you can prevent it from happening again.
Exactly. Incident response isn't just about putting out fires. It's about learning from those fires and coming back stronger.
And that loops back to that idea of continuous monitoring that the playbook talks about.
It does. Continuous monitoring helps you spot those threats and weaknesses before they become a problem.
So being proactive.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the key to staying ahead in the ever-changing world of fraud.
You've mentioned that changing landscape a few times. What trends do you see shaping the future of fraud?
One of the biggest is how sophisticated the fraudsters are getting. They're using cutting-edge tech like artificial intelligence and machine learning to come up with even more advanced attacks.
That's like an arms race.
Yeah, kind of both sides using technology to try and outsmart each other.
But we can use that same technology to fight back, right?
Like the good news, data analytics and machine learning are powerful tools.
Yeah.
They can help us spot patterns and anomalies that could be signs of fraud.
So we can use their weapons against them?
Exactly. Turn their tools into our tools.
And is there anything else you're seeing out there?
Another trend is that the lines between cybercrime and financial crime are getting blurred.
Oh, how so?
We're seeing more cases where hackers are going straight for financial systems, trying to steal money or manipulate transactions.
So it's not just about data anymore. It's about hitting organizations right in their wallets.
That's right. And this really shows why we need a more integrated approach to preventing fraud.
Okay.
One that breaks down the barriers between cybersecurity and financial crime prevention.
That's not enough to just treat those as separate issues anymore.
Not anymore. Those lines are getting blurrier all the time.
So we need to take this holistic approach you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
One that looks at all the threats and vulnerabilities.
Yeah, both internal and external.
It sounds like a lot to think about, but I really appreciate you breaking it down for us.
You're welcome.
So to recap, even though the playbook focuses primarily on internal controls, the principles and strategies can be applied to those external threats too.
Absolutely. It's all about building a culture of awareness, being vigilant, and proactively managing risk.
And that applies to everything?
It does to both internal and external threats.
This has been a really insightful discussion.
I've enjoyed it.
We've explored how to use the playbook to build a strong anti-fraud program.
Right.
And we've also talked about adapting those ideas to deal with the changing world of external threats.
Absolutely.
As we head into the final part of our deep dive, I'm really interested in taking a closer look at the human side of fraud. We've talked about what fraud is, the schemes, the risks, the controls.
Right.
But what about the people behind it? Who are these fraudsters?
Yeah.
Are they like these evil masterminds or just regular people making bad choices?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And it kind of challenges the way we think about fraudsters because a lot of times they don't fit that stereotype, the image we have in our heads.
Right.
They can be anyone, really, from someone just starting out to a top executive. And their reasons for doing it can be pretty varied, too.
Oh, why?
It could be for financial gain revenge, even as a sense of entitlement.
I think it's almost more unsettling to think of them as everyday people than some kind of criminal mastermind.
I get that it is, but the truth is fraud usually happens when a bunch of factors come together. The playbook talks about the fraud triangle.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It highlights these three things that contribute to fraud.
Okay, what are they?
Opportunity, motivation, and rationalization.
Can you break those down a little more?
Sure. Opportunity. That's when there are weaknesses and controls that create those openings for fraudsters.
Gotcha.
Motivation is what pushes someone to commit fraud, the pressure or incentive. And rationalization is how they justify what they're doing. They convince themselves that it's not really wrong.
So they're basically creating this story in their head to make it okay, even though they probably know it's not
Exactly. They might say they deserve the money or the company won't even miss it.
Right.
Or they'll pay it back later.
Yeah, classic.
But it's all just a way to avoid facing the consequences.
And those consequences can be huge.
Yeah.
Not just for the person doing it,
Right.
but for the entire organization.
Absolutely. Fraud can lead to big financial losses, damage to reputation, legal problems, even jail time.
Wow.
It can really shake up a company and have a lasting impact on how employees feel.
Yeah, morale, trust, that kind of thing.
It affects everything.
So what can organizations do to minimize these risks?
Right.
And build a culture where fraud is less likely to happen?
Having a strong anti-fraud culture is so important.
Okay, how do you do that?
It's about creating an environment where fraud is just not tolerated at all.
Wow.
People feel comfortable speaking up if they see something suspicious.
Okay.
And ethical behavior is something that's valued and rewarded.
So it's not just about having rules.
Right. It's about creating a shared sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
A culture of integrity, exactly. And that has to start from the top.
Yeah, the leaders need to set the tone.
They do. They need to make it clear that ethical behavior is non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And that fraud won't be tolerated.
Actions speak louder than words.
Leaders have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
What are some specific ways they can show that they're committed to ethical conduct?
Well, transparency is a big one.
Oh.
Leaders should be open about the organization's financials and how decisions are made.
Makes sense.
They should encourage employees to ask questions and raise concerns
Right.
without being afraid of any backlash.
Yeah, that's important.
And they need to lead by example,
Okay.
showing integrity and accountability in everything they do.
So it's not just about having policies and procedures in place.
It's about something bigger.
Yeah.
It's about creating a culture where ethics and accountability are just part of who you are as an organization.
Exactly.
And that takes time and effort.
For sure.
It's an ongoing process of communication training and reinforcement. But it's an investment that's worth it.
Because preventing fraud is cheaper than dealing with it.
Absolutely. And as we talked about before, there's the human cost to consider too.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
Fraud can break down trust-hurt relationships and create an environment of fear and suspicion. It can damage that sense of teamwork and collaboration.
So it's about protecting the people in the organization too.
It is. It's about protecting everyone's well-being.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening.
Yeah, it's been great.
We've explored all the steps in the anti-fraud playbook, from assessing risk to conducting investigations. And we've talked about what fraud really means for organizations and individuals, and how important it is to build a culture of ethics and accountability. Any final thoughts for our listeners as they think about their own efforts to combat fraud?
You know, fraud is a serious issue, but it's not unbeatable.
That's good.
By understanding the risks, putting strong controls in place, and fostering a culture of ethics, we can really reduce the impact of fraud and create a more secure and trustworthy environment.
That's a great takeaway. It's empowering to know that we can actually make a difference.
We can.
And this playbook gives us a plan to do just that.
It does. It gives organizations the tools and knowledge they need
Yeah.
to build strong anti-fraud programs that fit their unique situations.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Your insights have been incredibly valuable.
Glad to be here.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable knowledge and strategies.
Yeah.
To strengthen your defenses against fraud, remember, fighting fraud is a team effort.
It is.
And together, we can create a more secure and ethical world for everyone.